and it to drop you right into a custom template. Now, custom templates are slightly different. There's no direct tags on them. You can come and tag them later on. It drops in my subscription. I have to choose the resource group. It's asking me for it knows my region based on the resource group I've chosen. And it's going to ask me for my existing storage account name, and that's called trading 2025-01-08. It's also going to ask me for my storage name. I'm going to keep the same name. File share name, keep the same name. That's the reason why I kept the same name. It's easier to set it up. Password, I'm going to create a new one. And then I hit next. It's going to do some validation, and I hit create. Notice there is no tags, if you notice that. It found the storage account. Everything worked out perfectly. No issues there. So it's actually, this deployment takes about, I'll say about 30 seconds to get done. A container instance is basically a single machine that you don't get to deploy your own code directly into by RDP. You have to connect to a container instance, sorry, a Docker repository or an Azure container registry to put your images down. So what this is doing basically is that Microsoft is doing two things, right? It's actually going to provision an operating system for us on a single physical machine that they own. And it to then goes into Docker Hub and then pulls the images down for us. So that's basically how that works here. So even in here, you have in containers. You can have multiple containers in there, by the way, but this is the only container you have right now. And the container obviously tells you it started, it pulled it from the GitHub repository. The Docker repository pulled that in. You can use identity here to control who has access to it. It uses the default identity. If you want to lock it down, you can actually use a signed identity. But again, we're not covering that today, right? So for the file transfer or the secure file transfer, I recommend using the fully qualified domain name or FQDN. The public IP, because we don't own the physical server, constantly changes when it gets shut down or restarted. If Microsoft is doing any patching, they will take ownership and do what they got to do behind the scenes. And when they restart it, you get a new IP address. But the FQDN or fully qualified domain name does not change. So I always recommend using that as your preferred SKFTP option. All right, so we're here now. So the next thing we got to do is do some testing. So this is where the real test starts, right? So let me close this. I'm going to put that host name in here and also going to I'm also going to put in the username and password. So it's CKFTP and the password. Now, if you've done any work on CKFTP, you know that the port is 22. We don't use 21 anymore because obviously it's been breached numerous times. And then you can connect. It says always trust. It's going to put a thumbprint on your local machine and it's a trust. It's almost like a certificate, but it's really more of a thumbprint. And then now we can start moving the real loads that we're focusing on. So if we go back to our training documentation, I think it's that one. No, it's not that one. It's this one. Okay, yeah, this is the one here. So we're going to be moving these files. Now these files are pretty big. These files are 200 meg, 183 meg. These files are roughly about a million records. Now, in a real live business scenario, you will get situations where they're moving files in bulk like this. You get them moving 3 million files at once, and you need to be able to accommodate that load. So what we did here is I go over to FileZilla and I'll walk you through that whole process of how we're going to deploy this. I'm going to see what's happening in our back end. So we're going to select a bunch. So we're going to force this. We're going to just try to kill the system right now. So we're going to select all these here. Take that one. I'm going to take the one with 100,000 records. And that's it. So let's go with these ones for now. These are the big ones. We're going to upload that. Might take a few. My network is not the fastest today. I don't know. I'm having some network issues, but 3, 4 meg will run. So the first one goes, obviously, this is a small one, 24,000 records. Now remember that timer trigger I set up, this runs on the top of every hour. So by this is 8:34 right now. On top of the next hour, which is 8:35, it's gonna come in here and look for files that we're gonna be doing. And we can watch that. We can go into Azure, come out from here, go back into our handy dandy storage account that we keep spending a lot of time in. You can we go into our shared folders, one that we newly created. You can see there's a couple of files in here. This one's actually gone through. The ones that are still getting processed are still getting pushed have 0 file bytes in here. There's a pro that timer trigger that I had that the function app's job is to do is to actually inspect this, look at this every minute and see whether there's any files that needs to get picked up. It does pick up files that have, if you know that file is gone, and then what it does, it places it in the to create a process folder for a new CSV file, which you see here. This is the second one that came in. This came in at 8:35, so this is all brand new. So the difference now is that we're moving a larger load. So we're moving a significant amount of records. So this is actually parsing it, it's keeping the file size the same. We've already walked through what this does, and it will keep moving these files. Now we can move over to application insights. So we looked at the storage accounts, we looked at the function app, we spent a little bit of time in the we haven't spent enough time in the service bus, but we'll go back to that and have a look at that. But if you look at the application insights can actually tell you what's going on with all your machines. So as we're moving this data, we want to make sure that we have enough capacity to be able to push it all the way up to our SQL database. And this is where that's initial provisioning of the server, when I mentioned that we're using a consumption plan, Microsoft knows that we're starting to move large loads. Guess what it does? It spins up a secondary server for us. It's saying, okay, you're starting to move some serious data. I'm going to give you the capacity that you're looking for to accommodate what you're trying to do. Let's leave that open. The service bus, you can actually do a couple of fun, cool things in here, which I would technically recommend you doing this in a production environment, but if you're testing your own environment, you can actually get away doing that. It connects to application insights here, and it gives you a live feed of all the data that's being passed through Trigger. It's going to show up in a minute. If it all works. Let's see. Wait a second. Oops, maybe nothing. Uh, Normally this works. Let's try file stream. Let's switch over to file stream. Connected. Nothing showing up here. Yeah, so hopefully, yeah, there we go. So you see data coming through now. This is the raw, as you can see, this is the raw CSV file passing through our trigger. This actually captures it. You can see in real time passing through. I mean, you're not going to scroll any faster than you can get to the bottom. It's actually moving pretty quickly. And then inside of here, we have three servers all of a sudden. So now the data is becoming, so you can see that we're getting a lot of data coming through here. We're hitting those computes. Microsoft is recognizing that we're moving more data, and then is actually making sure our dependency calls are there. So when we hit those high computes, Microsoft will spin up a new server. And then it's just spin it down when we realize we're not using as many computers as needed to spin it back up. There's scenarios where we go up to 29 physical servers when we're moving a lot of data. We're not going to get to that number, I don't think, today, but we might get to like 9 or 10 servers, depending on how much data we're moving. But one thing we can do while that's going is that we can go into our SQL database and do a count and see how well we're doing in terms of ingestion, right? Select, count, um, yeah, kind of start from DBO table and see how we're doing here. So we're already at close to 500,000 records, right? So we're moving pretty quick. So I need to get quicker as more data gets coming through. So what Microsoft does is that the way Azure Functions work is that as more data gets piped in, we don't just wait in a line and say, "Hey, I'm going to process this information for us." Then we'll come back and get the rest. As data comes in, the capacity goes up to accommodate the more data. So we don't have any capacity limit in the sense we're just going to scale to how much data points as needed to get work done. So it's like adding bodies to a situation. Now we're hitting those we're having some dependency call errors. And the reason why I have this call failures here is because I mentioned to you at the beginning that we spun up a very cheap service bus. So service bus is going to be hitting those peaks in a minute. And the advantage of having a live telemetry like what you're seeing right now is that you can see when you're hitting those dependency calls. So if you're doing something like a penetration testing in your environment, and then you're seeing the dependency exceptions here, that means you have resource constraints. You have to make sure that you handle that. Now we're up to 7 servers. I didn't do anything, and Microsoft decided, okay, we're going up to 7 servers. And we're going to see a lot of these more coming out. So if I click away from this, let's see how we're doing with the data. We're over almost 1 million records. So this is corporate standard ingestion. This is like the speed in which you can ingest some of these loads. Let's go into a service bus. So this is the guy that's making it all happen. We went from here and now we're ingesting at this peak. We're putting a lot of data. That's the reason why you're seeing all these. So we're hitting those numbers. So we're at 140K per 140 actually 1,400 records are being processed every minute. Each one has 200 records in them. And then if you go to our topics now, which is more interesting here, you can actually see how the data is flowing to all our dependency systems, right? So you have a NoSQL database here, getting some data in. You have a SQL database, get some data. You can see data in here. You can actually go into the SQL database here itself, and I don't recommend doing this either. And then you can go into Service Bus Explorer, which is basically allows you to peek into the next message. So that's the message appears, next message appears. These are the 3 messages that appeared in the peak. So it just says, okay, you can peek into that. So you can click on one of these guys. And you can see the same thing that we're seeing normally in the physical file. This is actually just sent this to Service Bus. It's just telling you delivery counts is 0, meaning that everything's good. Normally, if you have exceptions here, it gets stuck in the deadline queue, and then your delivery counts fails. And the way we can introduce that, which I don't recommend doing either, okay, you hear me say this every so often, is you can go into your config file. Remember, the config file is king. And where's that table at? I'm losing track of where I am now. Okay, let me go back to a storage account. Oops, I must have left that. I wonder why I did that. Let's go over here. Function app. Oh, I did that. I went in there twice. That's why. All right, so I'm going to log in one more time and go into our storage account. Now we're going to create a failed state. So we're going to create what we call a dead letter. Meaning we're forcing our consumer app to fail on purpose. And so for that, I need to see what I need to do. So service bus, we're going to just take the service bus NoSQL. I'm going to create a dead letter situation in that one. So I'll show what that looks like. I'm going to take that one, go into here, and we should wrap up. I know we're over time. Just one more check. And we can go into our container here, go into our config file, and then we can press go in here. Look at this. And oops. And the way I force the deadline is by actually introducing a breaking change. And the way I introduce a breaking change is by adding a 1 to one of these types. And I know that doesn't exist in my orchestration. And if I hit save now, and if I go into, I'm losing track of where I am now. If I go in here now and go into my NoSQL here, you start seeing dead letters. And what dead letter is, like I mentioned to you before, is a message that cannot be processed by the consumer. It's going to create a dead letter, and that dead letter is going to keep going until I clear it. Yeah, obviously you have to write a separate system to actually go in here and pull information of your dead letter because, or you can come into the service bus here and actually make those changes. Now, if I go back to my, oops, where was I now? And you see all the exceptions. See, this is going crazy here. This is just going nuts. So this is how you know when you've introduced a defects. All of a sudden your backend is failing. This spikes and everything spikes. So this is like I purposely introduced a failure inside of my system without doing any code deployments. Remember, so me let's I shift hit the save button. If I go back over here, oops, I always lose track of where I am because I have so many windows open. the errors disappear. Immediately I hit that save button, the errors just fly down. So this is how quickly you can resolve an issue. So now my deadline issue is resolved. I don't have any exceptions to showing up here anymore because I've actually resolved that problem very quickly. And then everything starts going downstream, no problem. So if I come into my NoSQL here, the problem with dead letters is that dead letters are messages that cannot get processed. You have to physically go in there and manually replay those messages back into the system. So we have 740 messages that technically were lost because the system went down, but they're still sitting in your dead letter. So this is where the service bus comes into play. So backend systems are kind of protected to some degree that the messages are not lost. You can go into my dead letter here. I can then um, peek into the next message. Obviously, these messages are available. Then I can select these ones here. I can resend the selected messages out to the system if I wanted to. And I hit send, and I will resend them out. So normally, if you're not going to have 700 over time, but if you do send, if you have a number of messages that's stuck in here, you can actually resend them out, and then you should be good to go. And then you have to clear once you have to keep track of that. Once those go out, you got to keep track of the messages that you're sending out. This is for some reason. Yeah, there you go. That's sent successfully. It doesn't clear out. It just selects the numbers. So you have to keep track of the numbers you're doing. Because when you peek into the next message, you start from the next count on. And then you send those batches. Then you then purge these dead letters once you send them all out, they're working. So that's the last thing. The last piece I wanted to cover is, I know we ran over a lot, but it's a lot of material here, is the Kusto queries. Now, how do we know how well our system is performing overall? Like we've set this whole thing up, we're moving data across. The business wants to know how much data has been ingested into our system and how it's behaving, right? So if you go over to, where's the what I want to use? Actually, don't, sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. So I need to go into here. So we're in the right area, but we want to go into our log. So this is the question about Log Analytics Workspace. Log Analytics Workspace allows you to inspect the performance of your environment in real time, right? So I'm going to grab this query first and run this, and then you see what I'm talking about. So it's called Custo Query or KQL, two names you hear out there. So this is charting everything for me. This is charting everything that I need to chart in terms of all the different processes that are running and when it started. So it started at this time, it's running the free processes. You can click on an area, you can remove things from here. So I want to just isolate what I'm looking for. I can start taking things off, right? And then I can just isolate down to what I'm looking for. So this you can do within the concept of acoustic query and charting. We can also look for specifics, like if you're looking for a specific process that's running and how it's performing in real time, you can actually, uh, okay, no, I'm sorry. So I need to go back to, let me see which one it was. So I want to focus on, let's see what I want to focus. I want to focus on one. Let's take the service bus trigger itself, right? I want to grab the service bus trigger and I want to see how many times, how often my messages were taken off the service bus and put it into my database. So this is the database here that I'm putting my service into, but I want to see how often, how much data I'm getting, because obviously we have a bottleneck in the service bus, right? So for me to do that, I can just grab this here, expand that a little bit. You can see it. And I can run this. Oops. Let's run this over here. And what I was going to do is produce a chart just specifically for the service bus runs. So you can see we started here. We started at 835, which is one of the things I think I showed you at 835. We had 500 records or 500 files that got moved. Each had 200 records in there. So we're looking at 100,000 here. Then here we went to just on less than 100,000. Yeah, it went over 100,000. We went 200,000 plus because we had a big influx of records. So it fluctuates. So you have 80, then it goes up and down. Normally, if you have a premium plan with your service bus and you have a very good SQL backend database, this is normally consistent because it's going to push more data to it. So the function app can push more, but because service bus has some capacity limits, it is. When we started out, we did a sample load at 815 to capture that as well. But what this does, it gives you inside information on how your ETL process is working. So if you have an ETL or all-day ETL, a lot of companies do have all-day ETLs. They want to understand during the course of the day whether they have bottlenecks. You can say, hey, I mean, your average is 1,000 a day, but between two and three, there's some issues. And then we can do some investigation to figure out where they have these capacity limits and how we can manage them in real time. So you get some inside information on how long analytics gives you the inside information of how things work. Now, the performance tab, um, like I mentioned to you, application insight is very powerful. Again, this is another one I'll put in my back pocket if you're solutioning for businesses in Azure. The performance tab here, apart from this, we don't need this anymore. It's also very good to actually showcase just generally how your environment is performing and when it started peaking. You can see all the endpoints I'm touching. You can see how many times I've collected. You can see my duration on each of these. If these numbers are too high, you can say, well, hey, my API is not performing the way I expected to. I'm running milliseconds. The parser will run for long because it's parsing files, so that will run long. We know that. Upload is what I tested. The file checker obviously is just checking. And the blob trigger is running in sub-milliseconds, so it's less than a second for each time. And then you can drill down into the actual individual calls if you wanted to get very specific. It actually captures every single call. And then you can inspect it. And then you also can drill down here as well to get more detail about each call and each step that happens. So this is how granular you can get. And then it captures information around the correlation ID that was generated for each of the steps. You can see that there's a couple of calls here. We call it NoSQL trigger. The SQL trigger took 233 milliseconds, while the NoSQL trigger took half a millisecond. So I can just tell by looking at these two that, oh, my SQL database is performing a lot better than my NoSQL database right now. So that's the inside information you can get very quickly by just using application insights without having to do anything else. Now, one of the things that you can do as well is that if you have errors, which we did have errors because I introduced breaking changes, right? You can go to a transaction search here. And if you're in Network Operating Center and you want to find out how many errors you have, you can just type in errors. And Microsoft does an incredible job of just giving you color coding of the exceptions that happen and when they happened. And then it tells you exceptions are always dark red because something is really wrong. The yellows are the custom events which I have in my system. And the greens are basically other errors that happen inside that. So you order of execution is you look at the red, yellow, and the green, almost like a signal light, if you want to call it that. Then you can actually go in and drill down into this exception. It tells you what happened and what led up to the exception in here. Break down the service bus was the issue, right? Because service bus was having a hard time sending it to my backend. Remember, I introduced that breaking change on the SQL side, and that's what happens when you do that. And it's telling me it's out of range exception here. It's showing the exception here. It's saying it can't create a table. So that's basically how you can do a quick check to see where they have exceptions in your environments. And because you have charting here, you can actually set up alerts around some of these indicators if you wanted to do that. But we're not going to cover that in this section here. And then you can actually go down to customize it to the last hour because obviously this system hasn't been running for 24 hours. And then it tells you how many exceptions. We introduced 16,000 exceptions while we turn nothing off. That's how quickly exceptions build up. So that's all I have actually. This is actually hopefully this was something that was insightful to you. And hopefully you have an opportunity to actually use Azure in your environment. Any questions? Anybody still on? Yeah. All right. So I'm going to stop the recording. This recording, like I said, this is recorded, is going to be available in the next couple of days on the same URL which I sent out.